She had been in labor so long, the machines stopped alarming. Not because things were improving, but because there was nothing left to warn them about. The numbers on the monitors had flatlined into a rhythm so steady, so unchanging, that even the nurses stopped glancing at them. 36 hours. 36 hours of contractions that went nowhere, of cervical measurements that refused to progress, of a baby that couldn't move. 7 midwives had tried. 3 specialists had failed. A billionaire stood helpless in a hallway where money meant nothing. Cedar Ridge Medical Center in Dallas, Texas, was the kind of hospital where senators recovered from heart surgery and NFL quarterbacks came for discreet knee repairs. The maternity wing had been renovated just 18 months prior. Italian marble in the private suites, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Dallas, sound-proofed walls thick enough to make you forget you were in a hospital at all. But all that luxury, all that expertise, all that cutting-edge technology, none of it mattered when a baby decided it wasn't coming out. Evelyn Carter's screams had faded hours ago. Now she only moaned. Low, hollow. The sound of a body that had given everything and had nothing left to give. Outside her door, Grant Carter, her husband, the man who'd built a real estate empire from strip malls to skyscrapers across 3 states, pressed his forehead against the wall and tried to remember how to breathe. His phone had died an hour ago. He hadn't noticed. 14 missed calls from his assistant. 6 from his lawyer, 2 from the mayor. None of it mattered. Inside that room, his wife was dying. The doctors wouldn't say it. Not yet. But he could see it in their faces, in the way they avoided his eyes when they stepped out for consultations, in the tone they used when they said words like complications and monitoring closely and doing everything we can. Everything wasn't enough. Then a janitor walked in. No badge, no credentials, no permission. Just 5 words that made everyone freeze. I know what's wrong. Security was already being called. Doctors were already preparing for surgery that might come too late. But the woman on the bed, the one everyone else spoke over, looked at the janitor's eyes and saw something the experts didn't have. Certainty. What happened in the next 5 minutes didn't just save a baby. It shattered a hierarchy, exposed a system, and proved that the most dangerous thing in any room is the knowledge you choose to ignore. Dr. Mitchell Brennan had delivered over 4,000 babies in his 23-year career. He'd handled breech births, twins, triplets, emergency C-sections in the back of ambulances, deliveries in elevators when mothers couldn't make it to the suite. He'd been featured in Texas Monthly as one of the top 10 obstetricians in the state. His hands had guided senators' grandchildren into the world, oil executives' heirs, the children of people whose names appeared on buildings. But standing in Suite 7 of Cedar Ridge Medical Center at 2:47 a.m., watching Evelyn Carter's vitals drift into a danger zone no amount of expertise could reverse, Dr. Brennan felt something he hadn't felt in 2 decades. Helplessness. "We need to make a decision," he said quietly to Grant Carter, who stood at the foot of the bed, knuckles white against the metal rail. "We can attempt another emergency C-section, but given her condition, the risks—" "I don't want to hear about risks." Grant's voice was raw. "I want you to fix this." Dr. Brennan opened his mouth, then closed it. What could he say? That medicine had limits, that some births defied protocol, that sometimes, despite every intervention, every technique, every piece of technology mankind had developed, nature simply refused to cooperate. Evelyn moaned again. Her skin glistened with sweat. Her eyes were half closed, pupils dilated from the pain medication that wasn't working anymore. "How long?" she whispered. Dr. Brennan stepped closer. "How long what, Evelyn?" "How long before you stop trying?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Grant made a sound, something between a sob and a curse, and turned away, both hands covering his face. Dr. Brennan had delivered the children of 3 U.S. congressmen, 2 federal judges, and the CEO of the largest pharmaceutical company in North America. He'd performed surgeries that made medical journals. He'd saved lives that insurance companies had written off. But right now, in this room, with this woman and this baby, he was out of options. "We're not giving up," he said, but even he could hear the hollow edge in his voice. Evelyn's laugh was bitter and breathless. "That's what the last doctor said." She wasn't wrong. 7 midwives had rotated through this room since yesterday afternoon. Each one had brought their own philosophy, their own technique, their own confidence that this time their approach would work. The first had been calm and encouraging, coaching Evelyn through breathing exercises and position changes. The second had been more aggressive, manual manipulation, trying to coax the baby into alignment. The third had suggested acupuncture. The fourth had used essential oils. By the 5th, even the nurses were exchanging glances. By the 6th, Grant had stopped pretending to be polite and started demanding answers no one had. The 7th had walked out 20 minutes ago without a word, and no one had called her back. Now it was just Dr. Brennan, 2 exhausted nurses, and a couple whose world was collapsing in real time. "We could try," Nurse Palmer began, but Dr. Brennan shook his head. "We've tried everything. There's a specialist in Houston. Who's 3 hours away? We don't have 3 hours." The heart monitor beeped. Steady. Too steady. The kind of steady that meant the body had stopped fighting and started conserving. Grant turned back around, his face a mask of rage and grief. "I will pay anything. Anything. Fly someone in from New York, from London, from wherever the hell you need to get someone who can—" "Mr. Carter," Dr. Brennan's voice was firm. "Money can't solve this." The words landed like a slap. Grant Carter had built an empire on the belief that everything had a price. Every problem had a solution if you paid enough, worked hard enough, demanded loudly enough. He'd bought his way out of zoning disputes, hostile takeovers, legal battles that should have destroyed him. But here, in this sterile room with machines that cost more than most people's houses, his wealth was worthless. "Then what the hell good is it?" Grant's voice cracked. Evelyn reached out, her hand trembling. "Grant." He crossed to her side in 2 strides, gripping her hand like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "I'm here. I'm right here. If you have to choose, don't." His voice was sharp. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." "Grant." "No." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm not choosing. You hear me? I'm not." Dr. Brennan looked away, giving them privacy they didn't really have. Nurse Palmer busied herself checking IV lines that didn't need checking. The door opened. Dr. Sarah Vance stepped in, the 3rd specialist, flown in from Houston General at 11 p.m. She'd been reviewing Evelyn's charts for the past hour, consulting with colleagues via video call, searching for the angle everyone else had missed. One look at her face told Dr. Brennan she hadn't found it. "We need to prep for surgery," Dr. Vance said quietly. "Now." "We already tried." "I know what you tried. This is different. We go in laterally, avoid the previous incision site, extract manually if necessary." "Sarah," Dr. Brennan kept his voice low, "look at her vitals. She won't survive another surgery. Dr. Vance's jaw tightened. She won't survive not having it. They stared at each other. Two experts, two brilliant minds, both out of answers. Grant's voice cut through. Do it. Mr. Carter. I said do it, whatever you have to do. Just save them. Dr. Vance nodded once. Prep the OR. We go in 10 minutes. The room exploded into motion. Nurse Palmer grabbed the phone to call down to surgery. Another nurse appeared to start disconnecting monitors, preparing Evelyn for transport. Dr. Brennan stepped back, watching it all unfold, with a sinking certainty that they were about to make everything worse. That was when he heard it. The soft squeak of wheels, a janitorial cart rolling past the open door, and then silence. The squeaking stopped. Dr. Brennan glanced toward the doorway and saw a woman standing there. Older, maybe mid-50s, with skin the color of rich mahogany, and hair wrapped in a traditional head wrap, bronze with gold threading. She wore the gray utility uniform of Cedar Ridge's cleaning staff, a name tag that read Lila M., pinned slightly crooked on her chest. She wasn't moving, just standing there, staring into the room with an expression Dr. Brennan couldn't quite read. "Excuse me," he said, his tone sharper than intended. "We're in the middle of something." Lila didn't move. "Ma'am, you need to—" The baby's stuck sideways. The room went still. Every head turned. Lila stood in the doorway, one hand resting on her cart, the other hanging loose at her side. She wasn't looking at Dr. Brennan. She wasn't looking at Dr. Vance or Nurse Palmer or Grant Carter. She was looking at Evelyn. "What did you say?" Dr. Vance's voice was ice. Lila's gaze didn't waver. "I said the baby's stuck sideways. Shoulder dystocia. Left shoulder caught on the pelvic bone. That's why nothing's working." Dr. Brennan felt a flush of anger rise in his chest. "We've already assessed for shoulder dystocia. That's not what—" "You assessed for anterior shoulder dystocia." Lila's voice was calm, matter of fact. "This is posterior. Baby rotated backward somewhere around hour 20. You've been trying to push it forward when you need to rotate it back." Dr. Vance took a step forward. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who's seen this before." "You're a janitor." "Yes, ma'am." "So unless you have a medical degree hidden under that uniform, I suggest you—" "I've seen a baby die from exactly what you're about to do." The words landed like a physical blow. Grant's head snapped up. "What?" Lila finally looked away from Evelyn, her eyes moving to Grant. There was no hostility in her expression, no judgment, just a terrible, quiet certainty. "If you take her into surgery right now," Lila said softly, "you'll cut through scar tissue from the previous C-section attempt. It's too soon. Her body can't handle it. She'll hemorrhage before you get the baby out." "That's not your call to make," Dr. Brennan said, his voice tight. "No, sir, it's not." "Then I suggest you get back to your cart and I can fix this." The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Dr. Vance laughed, a short, harsh sound. "You can fix this?" "Yes, ma'am." "With what? Mop water and prayer?" Lila didn't flinch. "With my hands." "You're—" Dr. Vance shook her head. "Security. Now." Nurse Palmer reached for the phone, but Grant's voice stopped her. "Wait." Everyone turned. Grant was staring at Lila, not with anger or dismissal, with something else. Desperation. "Can you really help her?" "Grant," Dr. Brennan started. "I'm asking her." Grant's eyes never left Lila's face. "Can you help my wife?" Lila held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I can try." Lila Monroe had cleaned the maternity wing of Cedar Ridge Medical Center for 11 years. 11 years of mopping floors that wealthy women walked across in designer slippers. 11 years of emptying trash bins filled with discarded flower arrangements that cost more than her monthly rent. 11 years of wiping down surfaces, restocking supplies, and moving through rooms like a ghost. Invisible. That's what cleaning staff were in hospitals like this. Necessary but unseen. Essential but unacknowledged. People looked through her, not at her. Conversations continued as if she wasn't there. Arguments happened. Secrets spilled. Life and death unfolded while she pushed her cart down corridors lined with art that cost more than her annual salary. She'd learned early on that invisibility was a kind of power. You saw things when people forgot you were watching. You heard things when they assumed you weren't listening. You understood patterns when you spent every day in the same place, observing the same routines, noticing the small deviations that meant something was wrong. Like tonight. Lila had been on the 4th floor when she first heard about the woman in Suite 7. It wasn't gossip. At Cedar Ridge, the staff were too professional for that, but information traveled anyway. A difficult delivery, multiple specialists, the kind of case that made nurses whisper and doctors grimace. She'd finished cleaning the nurses' station, restocked the supply closet, and moved on to the West Wing. Her shift ended at 3 a.m. Another hour and she'd be done, riding the bus back to her apartment in Oak Cliff, peeling off the uniform that smelled like disinfectant and exhaustion, falling into bed for 5 hours before her second job started. 2 jobs, 60-hour weeks, 53 years old, with knees that ached and hands that cramped. But she was alive, and she had seen enough death to be grateful for the aching and the cramping. The 7th midwife had passed her at 2:15 a.m., walking fast, face tight with frustration. Lila had nodded a greeting that went unreturned. 5 minutes later, she'd seen Dr. Brennan heading toward Suite 7 with that particular expression doctors wore when they were out of answers but couldn't admit it yet. Then, Dr. Vance had arrived from Houston, her heels clicking against the polished floor with the sharp confidence of someone who believed expertise was the same as wisdom. Lila had learned the difference between those two things a long time ago. She'd been cleaning outside Suite 7 when she heard it. The sound. Not the medical equipment. Not the doctor's voices. Not even Evelyn Carter's labored breathing. The rhythm. Every birth had a rhythm. Lila had learned that from her grandmother, Mama Ruth, who'd been a midwife in rural Mississippi, back when hospitals were 40 miles away and babies didn't wait. Mama Ruth had delivered over 300 babies in her 50 years of practice. She couldn't read medical charts, didn't know the Latin names for bones or muscles, couldn't explain the biochemistry of oxytocin or the mechanics of cervical dilation. But she could hear a birth going wrong from 3 rooms away. The body has a voice, Mama Ruth used to say, her hands steady and sure as she guided Lila's younger fingers across a pregnant woman's belly. You just have to learn its language. Lila had been 13 the first time she'd helped with a birth. 17. The first time she'd done it alone. Mama Ruth was sick. The nearest hospital was too far. And a young mother named Jackie Davis was having her first baby in a 1-room house with no running water and walls thin enough to hear the rain through. That baby had been stuck sideways. Shoulder dystocia. Jackie had been in labor for 18 hours, her husband pacing outside, her mother praying in the corner, and Lila, barely more than a child herself, with her grandmother's voice in her head and her grandmother's knowledge in her hands. She'd saved them both. But she'd also seen what happened when you didn't know what to do. 2 years later, in a different house, with a different mother. Lila had arrived too late. The baby had been stuck the same way. No one had known how to turn it. By the time they'd driven the mother to the hospital, a full hour on dirt roads, it was over. Mother and child, both gone. Lila remembered standing in that hospital hallway, 19 years old and hollow with grief, watching a doctor explain to the father what had gone wrong. The words were technical, clinical, but the message was simple. If someone had known what to do, they'd still be alive. She'd never forgotten that. Now, 33 years later, standing outside Suite 7 with a mop in one hand and a lifetime of invisible knowledge in her heart, Lila heard that same rhythm. The wrong rhythm. The dying rhythm. She'd stopped walking, stood there, listened. The doctors inside were talking about surgery, about risks and percentages and protocols, using all the right words. But they were wrong. Lila could hear it in the way Evelyn's breathing hitched, in the pattern of the contractions, too regular, too unchanging, in the absence of progress despite hours of intervention. The baby was stuck backward, not forward like they thought, not breech, not transverse, backward. And if they took Evelyn into surgery without realizing that, they'd cut into tissue that was already compromised, try to extract a baby positioned in a way that made extraction nearly impossible without rotation, and likely lose both mother and child in the process. Lila knew this, not because she'd read it in a textbook, not because she'd studied it in medical school, but because she'd lived it, seen it, felt it under her own hands, and now she had a choice. Walk away, keep cleaning, let the experts handle it, or speak up. Break the invisible barrier that kept people like her separate from people like them. Risk humiliation, anger, consequences she couldn't predict. For what? For a woman she didn't know. For a baby she'd never meet. For the slim chance that maybe, just maybe, her grandmother's knowledge was worth more than a medical degree. Lila thought about Mama Ruth, about Jackie Davis and her baby, alive because a teenager had refused to let them die, about the mother and child she'd lost because no one with knowledge had been there in time, about invisibility and what it cost. Then she stepped forward and knocked. The first midwife had been kind. Rebecca Martins, 38 years old, 15 years of experience, a gentle smile and a voice like warm honey. She'd arrived at 4:15 p.m. the previous day, when Evelyn's contractions had started getting serious, when Grant had still believed this would be routine. "You're doing beautifully," Rebecca had murmured, one hand on Evelyn's shoulder, the other timing contractions with practiced ease. "Just breathe through it. That's right. In through your nose, out through your mouth." Evelyn had believed her. For 3 hours, she'd believed that everything would be fine, that this was normal, that first births took time, and all she needed to do was breathe and push and trust her body. Then her water broke, and nothing changed. The cervix refused to dilate past 7 centimeters. The baby's heart rate stayed steady, but the head wouldn't engage. Rebecca had tried position changes, hands and knees, squatting, lying on her side. She'd tried walking, tried the birthing ball, tried visualization exercises and breathing patterns, and every gentle technique in her considerable toolkit. Nothing. At 7:30 p.m., Rebecca's smile had started to crack. "Let me call in a colleague," she'd said, too brightly, "just to get another perspective." The second midwife had been efficient. Sandra Wu, 45, 20 years of experience, a no-nonsense approach that made Grant feel like finally someone was taking control. She'd assessed the situation quickly, reviewed the monitors, and made her recommendation within 15 minutes. "We need to be more aggressive," Sandra had said. "Manual manipulation. I'll guide the baby's head into position." It sounded reasonable, scientific. Grant had nodded his approval. What followed was 90 minutes of the most excruciating pain Evelyn had ever experienced. Sandra's hands were skilled, yes, but reaching inside a woman's body to physically push a baby into alignment wasn't gentle. Couldn't be gentle. Evelyn's screams had echoed down the hallway despite the soundproofing. Grant had paced outside, unable to watch, hands shaking. And when Sandra finally stepped back, sweat on her forehead and frustration in her eyes, the baby hadn't moved. "I don't understand," she'd muttered, staring at the monitors like they'd personally betrayed her. This should have worked. The third midwife had been a believer. Patricia Holmes, 52, trained in traditional Chinese medicine alongside Western obstetrics. She'd arrived at 10 p.m. with a kit of acupuncture needles and an air of unshakable confidence. "The energy pathways are blocked," she'd explained to Grant, who'd been too exhausted to argue. "We need to stimulate the correct meridians, release the QI. Once the energy flows freely, the baby will follow." Evelyn had been skeptical, but at that point, she would have tried anything. Patricia had placed needles at specific points on Evelyn's hands, feet, lower back. She'd burned mugwort, chanted softly, created a ritual that felt more spiritual than medical. For 45 minutes, Evelyn had felt warmth spreading through her body. The contractions had intensified. Hope had flickered, then faded. The baby still wouldn't descend. Patricia had packed up her needles in silence, her confidence shattered. "I'm sorry," she'd whispered. This has always worked before." The fourth midwife had been holistic. Diane Foster, 31, trained at a birthing center in Oregon, advocated for natural births with minimal intervention. She'd arrived at 11:45 p.m., carrying a bag of essential oils, and a philosophy that birth was a natural process, best left to nature. "Your body knows what to do," Diane had told Evelyn, in a voice meant to be soothing, but that landed as condescending. "We just need to help you surrender to the process. Lavender for relaxation, clary sage to stimulate contractions, peppermint for focus." She'd diffused oils, given Evelyn a massage, led her through guided meditation, spoke about trusting the feminine wisdom and releasing fear. Grant had watched from the corner, his patience wearing thinner with every word. When Diane suggested that perhaps Evelyn's emotional blockages were preventing the birth, Grant had finally snapped. "Get out." Diane had blinked at him. "Excuse me?" "My wife is dying, and you're talking about emotional blockages. Get out of this room before I throw you out." Diane had left in a huff, muttering about masculine energy and toxic intervention. The fifth midwife had been clinical. Dr. Rachel Sims, 43, a certified nurse midwife with a PhD in obstetric care. She'd arrived at 1:15 a.m. with no patience for anything except data and evidence. She'd reviewed every chart, every timeline, every intervention attempted. "We're missing something," she'd said, more to herself than to anyone else. "The presentations don't align with the lack of progress. Unless..." She'd performed another examination, more extensive, more thorough, and found nothing. "I don't have an answer," Dr. Sims had admitted after an hour of tests. "The baby's position appears optimal. The measurements are within normal range. By every metric, this should be progressing. But it's not." "So what do we do?" Grant had asked, his voice hoarse. "I honestly don't know." The admission had been more frightening than any complications. Doctors weren't supposed to say they didn't know. They were supposed to have answers. The sixth midwife had been experimental. Lisa Rodriguez, 35, trained in a technique called spinning babies that involved specific movements and positions designed to help babies rotate into optimal birth positions. She'd arrived at 2:20 a.m. with videos queued up on her tablet and a determination that bordered on manic. "This will work," she'd insisted. "I've seen it work with posterior presentations, with asynclitic presentations, with every difficult position you can imagine." She'd put Evelyn through a series of positions that would have been challenging for an athlete, much less a woman who'd been in labor for 32 hours. Forward-leaning inversions, side-lying releases, pelvic tilts at specific angles. Evelyn had sobbed through it, not from hope, from despair, because she could feel deep in her bones that this wasn't working either. After 45 minutes, Lisa had sat back on her heels, her face pale. I can't." She'd left without finishing the sentence. The seventh midwife had been young. Amy Bradford, 29, fresh from a prestigious training program in Boston, eager and bright-eyed, and convinced that her modern education would solve what traditional methods couldn't. She'd lasted 17 minutes, one examination, one review of the charts, one look at Evelyn's exhausted face and the monitors showing a pattern that defied explanation. Then she'd walked out, didn't explain, didn't apologize, just left. Grant had stared at the empty doorway, something breaking inside him. 7 experts, 7 failures. And his wife was still screaming. Security was on the line. Nurse Palmer had the phone pressed to her ear, her eyes locked on Lila, who stood in the doorway with the kind of calm that felt dangerous in a room full of panic. "Yes, Suite 7, Palmer was saying. "We have an unauthorized person who—" "Hang up the phone." Everyone turned to Grant. He was staring at Lila with an intensity that made the air feel electric. "I said hang up the phone." "Mr. Carter," Dr. Brennan started. "Do it. Now." Nurse Palmer hesitated, then slowly lowered the phone, ending the call. The silence that followed was suffocating. Dr. Vance crossed her arms, her face a mask of professional outrage. "You cannot possibly be considering letting a janitor examine your wife." "Why not?" Grant's voice was raw. "She's the only person in this hospital who's claimed to know what's actually wrong. She's unqualified, unlicensed. She has no medical training, no credentials, no—" "And you do." Grant cut her off. "You and every other expert who's walked through that door. And my wife is still dying. So tell me, doctor, what exactly have your credentials accomplished in the last 36 hours? Dr. Vance's face flushed. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Grant's laugh was bitter. "Nothing about this is fair. What's not fair is watching my wife suffer while every certified professional in this hospital tells me they've tried everything. What's not fair is being told that money can't fix this, that expertise can't fix this, that nothing can fix this, and then having someone walk in and say they can." "She's a janitor," Dr. Vance repeated, as if the word itself was an argument. "She's someone who noticed something 7 midwives missed." "She noticed nothing. She said the baby's stuck backward." Grant's voice dropped. "Is she wrong?" Silence. Dr. Vance glanced at Dr. Brennan, who looked away. "We've assessed for every possible presentation," Dr. Vance said finally. "That's not what I asked." Grant took a step closer. "Is she wrong?" Dr. Vance's jaw tightened. "I would need to perform another examination to determine." "You've performed 6 examinations. How many more do you need?" "Mr. Carter, I understand you're desperate, but allowing an untrained individual to touch your wife could result in injury, infection, legal liability." I don't care about legal liability. Grant's voice shook. I care about my wife. And so do we. Which is why we're trying to prevent you from making a catastrophic mistake. The only mistake I've made is waiting this long. Grant turned to Lila, who hadn't moved from the doorway, hadn't defended herself, hadn't argued, just stood there, steady and certain, and completely out of place in her gray uniform among all these white coats and credentials. "What's your name?" Grant asked. "Lila Monroe, sir." "How do you know what's wrong with my wife?" "I've seen it before." "Where?" "Mississippi, 22 years ago. A young woman in labor. Same situation, baby stuck with the shoulder caught on the pelvic bone, but rotated backward, not forward. Makes all the difference in how you have to turn it." Dr. Brennan spoke up. "Mrs. Monroe, with all due respect, one experience 22 years ago doesn't qualify you to—" "It wasn't one experience." Lila's gaze shifted to him. "My grandmother was a midwife, delivered over 300 babies in 50 years. I assisted her from the time I was 13 until I was 20. I've seen births go right and births go wrong. I've seen babies saved and babies lost. And I learned that sometimes the problem isn't that you don't know enough. It's that you know too much of the wrong things." "That's absurd," Dr. Vance said. "Is it?" Lila didn't raise her voice. "You've tried everything you learned in medical school, every protocol, every technique, every intervention taught in your training, and none of it worked. Maybe the problem is that what you're dealing with isn't in your textbooks. Medicine isn't about folklore and superstition." "No, ma'am. It's about results, and right now, I'm the only person in this room offering any." The words hung there. On the bed, Evelyn made a sound, soft, pained, desperate. Everyone turned. She was looking at Lila. "Can you really help me?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. Lila met her eyes. "I can try. But if you're wrong, then I'm wrong, and you're no worse off than you are right now." "She'll be worse off if there's an injury caused by improper manipulation," Dr. Brennan interjected. "Mrs. Carter, you need to understand the risks." "I understand the risks of not trying." Evelyn's eyes never left Lila's face. "I understand that every doctor in this hospital has been telling me what won't work. This woman is telling me what might." "She could kill you," Dr. Vance said bluntly. "So could another hour of this." The truth of it silenced the room. Evelyn's hand shook as she reached out. "Please." Lila looked at that trembling hand, at the desperation in Evelyn's eyes, at the monitors showing vital signs that were slowly failing, at the faces of the doctors who wanted to stop her but couldn't offer any better options. Then she looked at Grant. "Sir, if I do this, I need you to trust me. Completely. No interference. No second-guessing. 5 minutes." "5 minutes? That's all I'll need. Either it works or it doesn't. But I can't do it with people yelling at me or security dragging me out or doctors telling me I'm wrong." Grant glanced at Dr. Brennan, at Dr. Vance, at the nurses who were staring at this surreal scene like they'd stumbled into an alternate reality. Then he nodded. 5 minutes. "You have 5 minutes." Dr. Vance exploded. "Grant, you cannot—" "I can. And I am." He turned to her, his voice hard. "You can stay and watch, or you can leave. But you will not interfere. Is that clear?" Dr. Vance looked like she wanted to argue. Then she glanced at Evelyn, at the monitors, at the situation that had spiraled beyond any protocol she'd ever learned. "If this goes wrong," she said quietly, "I'm on record as opposing it." "Noted." Dr. Vance stepped back, her arms crossed, her face tight with anger and fear. Dr. Brennan sighed. I'll stay. Nurse Palmer nodded. Everyone was staying, to witness a miracle, or a disaster. Lila set down her mop, stepped fully into the room, moved toward the bed where Evelyn lay, broken and desperate and willing to trust a stranger, with no credentials and nothing to offer except certainty. She stopped at the bedside and placed one hand gently on Evelyn's arm. "Listen to me," Lila said softly. "This is going to hurt. More than anything you've felt so far. Your body is exhausted, and the baby is going to resist the movement at first. But I need you to stay with me. No matter how bad it gets, I need you to breathe and stay present. Can you do that?" Evelyn nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Good." Lila washed her hands at the sink in the corner, dried them, and returned to the bed. "Then let's bring your baby home." She positioned herself at the foot of the bed, placed her hands on Evelyn's belly, closed her eyes, and began to feel. The first 30 seconds were silent. Lila's hands moved across Evelyn's swollen belly with a gentleness that seemed impossible, given the urgency of the situation. Her fingers pressed here, paused there, traced invisible lines that meant nothing to anyone watching but everything to the woman who'd learned to read bodies the way others read books. Dr. Brennan glanced at the clock. 2:53 a.m. 5 minutes started now. "What is she doing?" Dr. Vance whispered, not really expecting an answer. "Mapping," Dr. Brennan murmured back. He'd seen enough births to recognize technique when he saw it, even if he didn't understand the method. "She's locating the baby's position." Lila's eyes remained closed. Her face was perfectly still, no strain, no doubt, just deep concentration. Her hands moved lower, then to the side, then up again, creating a pattern that looked random but clearly wasn't. Then she stopped, both hands pressed against the left side of Evelyn's abdomen, just below the ribcage. "There you are," Lila breathed. "What?" Grant leaned forward. "What did you find?" "The shoulder." Lila opened her eyes, looking at Evelyn. "Your baby is facing your spine with the left shoulder wedged against your pelvic bone. Every contraction has been pushing the baby forward, but forward is blocked. We need to rotate the baby backward first, then bring it forward, like backing a car out of a tight space before you can drive forward." Dr. Vance shook her head. "That's not how. It's exactly how." Lila didn't look away from Evelyn. "But it's going to hurt. I won't lie to you about that. Your body is going to fight me, because it doesn't understand what I'm trying to do. But I need you to trust that the pain means it's working." Evelyn nodded, her face pale. "Do it." Lila took a breath. Then her hands moved, not gently this time, with purpose, with force. She pressed down on the left side of Evelyn's belly, while simultaneously pushing up from below with her other hand, a maneuver that looked impossible, that defied every instinct about how to handle a pregnant woman's body. Evelyn screamed. The sound ripped through the room like a physical thing. Grant lunged forward, but Dr. Brennan caught his arm. "Wait," Brennan said, though he wasn't sure why he was defending this. "Let her work." Lila's jaw tightened. Sweat appeared on her forehead. The muscles in her forearm stood out as she applied pressure that seemed brutal, but was, somehow, controlled. Precise. "Come on," she muttered. "Come on, baby. Work with me." On the monitor, the baby's heart rate dipped. Dr. Vance tensed. "The heart rate." "I see it." Lila didn't stop. Her hands adjusted angle, changed pressure, moved in a circular motion that was half massage, half manipulation. Evelyn was sobbing now, her whole body rigid with pain. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't. Yes, You can. Lila's voice cut through the panic. Breathe through it. The baby's moving. I can feel it. Just a little more. Lila, Grant's voice broke. Trust me, Mr. Carter. We're almost there. Almost where? Dr. Brennan wanted to ask. He stared at Lila's hands, trying to understand what she was doing. It wasn't any technique he'd learned, wasn't in any manual or protocol. But there was something about the way she moved, the confidence, the certainty, that made him wonder if, maybe, just maybe, she actually knew what she was doing. On the monitor, the heart rate climbed back up. Then something shifted. Dr. Brennan saw it on Evelyn's face first, a change in the quality of her pain. Still intense, but different. Not the static agony of something stuck, but the dynamic pain of something moving. There! Lila's voice was sharp with victory. That's it. The shoulder just released. Are you sure? Dr. Vance moved closer despite herself. I'm sure. Lila's hands gentled, supporting now rather than forcing. The baby's rotating. Slowly. We need to give it room. She placed both hands on Evelyn's belly again, this time pressing from the top down, encouraging the rotation to continue. Her eyes were closed again, her face drawn in concentration. Seconds ticked by. Everyone watched the monitors, watched Lila's hands. Watched Evelyn's face as the agony started to shift into something else. Progress. Dr. Brennan. Lila's eyes snapped open. Check her, now. Dr. Brennan moved on autopilot, positioning himself to examine Evelyn. His hands moved quickly, professionally, checking what 7 other medical professionals had checked throughout the night. What he found made him freeze. The cervix. He looked up, his face shocked. It's at 9 centimeters. How? Because the baby isn't blocking it anymore. Lila stepped back, wiping sweat from her forehead. The pressure released when the shoulder rotated. Her body can finish what it started. Evelyn gasped. Does that mean? It means you're going to have this baby. Lila smiled for the first time since entering the room. Right here, right now, no surgery. Grant made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Dr. Vance stared at the monitors like they'd betrayed her. This shouldn't be possible. And yet, Lila met her eyes. Here we are. Another contraction hit. But this time, Evelyn's cry sounded different, purposeful, like her body finally remembered what it was supposed to do. That's it, Dr. Brennan said, his voice full of wonder. The head's crowning. Evelyn, when the next contraction comes, I need you to push. Everything shifted. The room that had been full of defeat and desperation suddenly filled with motion. Nurses moving into position. Dr. Brennan preparing to catch. Dr. Vance stepping forward, despite her earlier protests, because whatever she thought about how they'd gotten here, a baby was coming, and protocol was protocol. Lila moved to the side, out of the way, her role complete. But Evelyn's hand shot out and grabbed hers. Stay, Evelyn gasped. Please. Lila looked at Dr. Brennan, who nodded. So Lila stayed, held Evelyn's hand, and watched as the woman she'd saved brought new life into the world. The baby was born at 3:04 a.m., 11 minutes after Lila Monroe placed her hands on Evelyn Carter's belly. 11 minutes after Grant Carter chose to trust a janitor over every expert in the building. 11 minutes that rewrote everything anyone in that room thought they knew about knowledge, expertise, and the dangerous assumptions that lived between the two. The cry that filled Suite 7 wasn't the weak mewling of a distressed infant. It was strong, angry. The sound of a baby who'd been ready to enter the world for hours and was furious it had taken this long. It's a girl, Dr. Brennan said, his voice thick with emotion he wasn't trying to hide. He laid the baby on Evelyn's chest, and the room watched as mother and daughter met for the first time. Evelyn was crying. Grant was crying. Even Nurse Palmer wiped at her eyes. The baby, red-faced and perfect, stopped crying the moment she felt her mother's skin. Her tiny hand curled against Evelyn's chest, and the monitors that had shown such concerning numbers for so long now displayed the steady, healthy rhythm of a newborn, adjusting to life outside the womb. Dr. Vance stood frozen at the foot of the bed, staring at the scene like it was something from a dream she couldn't quite wake from. "How?" she started, then stopped. "How is this possible?" No one answered, because the answer was standing beside the bed in a grey janitor's uniform, still holding Evelyn's hand, tears streaming down her own face. "Thank you," Evelyn whispered, looking up at Lila. "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." Lila squeezed her hand gently. "You did all the hard work, honey. I just gave your baby some directions." Grant moved around the bed, his eyes red, his face transformed with joy and disbelief. He looked at Lila for a long moment, then held out his hand. "I don't know how to thank you." Lila shook his hand, her grip firm. "You just did." "No." Grant's voice was fierce. "That's not enough. You saved them. Both of them. When everyone else said it couldn't be done, you walked in and—" His voice broke. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, sir, I did." "Why?" Lila looked at the baby, now peacefully resting against Evelyn's chest, and smiled. "Because I could." The simplicity of it landed like a bell tone in the quiet room. Because I could. Not because it was her job. Not because she'd be rewarded. Not because anyone expected it. Because she had knowledge that could save a life. And when that moment came, she chose to use it. Dr. Brennan cleared his throat. "We should monitor both mother and baby for the next few hours. Standard protocol after a prolonged labor." He hesitated, then looked at Lila. Would you be willing to stay? Just in case." The question acknowledged something no one in the room was quite ready to say out loud. That maybe expertise wasn't enough. That maybe knowledge came in forms they hadn't been trained to recognize. That maybe the hierarchy they'd built their careers on had cracks wider than anyone wanted to admit. "I can stay until my shift ends," Lila said. "After that, I have another job to get to." "Another job?" Grant looked shocked. "You work more than one job." "Yes, sir. I clean here and I work at a care facility for seniors in Oak Cliff. 7 a.m. to noon, 4 days a week." "You work 60-hour weeks?" "Most folks do, Mr. Carter." The quiet reproach in her voice wasn't intentional, but it landed anyway. Grant Carter, who'd built an empire, who lived in a house that could fit Lila's apartment 20 times over, who'd never worked an hourly job in his life, suddenly saw the woman in front of him clearly for the first time. Not as a miraculous savior, not as an anomaly who'd appeared at the perfect moment, but as someone who'd been there all along, cleaning his floors, emptying his trash, moving through his world invisible and essential and completely unseen. Until the moment she wasn't. "I want to hire you," Grant said suddenly. Everyone turned. "Excuse me?" Lila blinked. "As a consultant, for the hospital, for our family. I don't know. I'll figure out the details. But I can't let you walk out of here and go back to mopping floors when you just did something 7 experts couldn't do. Mr. Carter, I appreciate that, but name your price." Lila's expression shifted, not to excitement or gratitude, but to something cooler, more careful. I don't have a price, sir. Everyone has a price. Not everyone. Lila gently released Evelyn's hand and stepped back. What I did tonight wasn't about money. It was about using knowledge when it was needed. Making that knowledge conditional on payment would dishonor every woman who taught me, including my grandmother. Grant opened his mouth, then closed it. He wasn't used to being turned down, especially not by someone who clearly needed money. Then what can I do for you? Lila thought about it, looked at Evelyn, at the baby, at the doctors who were still trying to process what had just happened. Tell people what happened here, she said finally. Don't hide it. Don't smooth it over. Don't let the hospital bury this because it's uncomfortable or because it raises questions about their protocols. Tell the truth, that sometimes knowledge exists outside the system, and that maybe, just maybe, it's worth paying attention to. Dr. Vance flinched. Dr. Brennan looked away, but Grant nodded slowly. I can do that. Then we're square, Mr. Carter. Lila picked up her mop from where she'd left it by the door. Her shift wasn't over. There were still floors to clean, rooms to restock. Another 3 hours of work before she could go home. But as she stepped toward the hallway, Dr. Brennan's voice stopped her. Mrs. Monroe. She turned. He crossed the room, held out his hand. I was wrong about you, and I'm sorry. Lila looked at his hand, then at his face, saw genuine humility there, genuine respect. She shook his hand. You weren't wrong, Doctor. You just didn't know. There's a difference. Then she was gone, pushing her cart down the hallway, the squeak of its wheels fading into the background noise of the hospital, leaving behind a room full of people who would never see the world quite the same way again. News of what happened in Suite 7 spread through Cedar Ridge Medical Center like wildfire through dry grass. By 7 a.m., every nurse on every floor had heard some version of the story. By noon, it had reached administration. By 5 p.m., the hospital's legal team was in crisis mode. Rachel Morrison, Cedar Ridge's chief legal counsel, sat in her corner office overlooking downtown Dallas and tried to calculate the liability exposure of allowing an unlicensed janitor to perform what could only be described as a medical procedure. The numbers weren't good. We need to control this narrative, she said into the conference call that included the hospital's CEO, the head of obstetrics, and 3 other attorneys. Before it becomes a PR nightmare. It's already a PR situation, CEO David Kellerman said. His voice was tight. Grant Carter has been calling me every hour demanding that we recognize what happened. He wants to make a statement, hold a press conference. He's talking about starting a fund to preserve traditional birth knowledge. It's a disaster. The baby is healthy, Dr. Brennan interjected from his office. He'd been on this call for 45 minutes, and his patience was wearing thin. The mother is healthy. No one was harmed. In fact, they were saved when our protocols failed. Maybe instead of worrying about liability, we should be asking why 7 trained professionals couldn't do what a janitor did. Silence crackled across the line. That's not helpful, Mitchell, Rachel said carefully. Helpful to whom? The hospital's insurance premiums. Or the patients who might benefit from acknowledging that our training has blind spots. We can't set a precedent where unlicensed individuals perform medical procedures. Then maybe we need to examine how we define medical procedure and who we allow to be licensed. Rachel pinched the bridge of her nose. This is going to get complicated. That was the understatement of the year. In Oak Cliff, Lila Monroe was trying to sleep. She'd come home at 4:30 a.m., exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with her cleaning job. The adrenaline of what she'd done, the risk, the stakes, The moment when she'd thought maybe she'd been wrong and was about to cause catastrophic harm had finally crashed. She'd taken off her uniform, showered, crawled into bed, and hadn't been able to stop shaking. Not from fear, from the weight of it. She'd saved a life. 2 lives. She knew that intellectually. But she'd also crossed a line so fundamental that there was no going back. Every person who'd been in that room now knew who she was, what she could do. She couldn't return to invisibility even if she wanted to. And Lila wasn't sure if that was a gift or a curse. Her phone rang at 2 p.m. She woke disoriented, grabbed the phone, saw a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Mrs. Monroe, this is Samantha Reed from Channel 8 News. We're doing a story on the extraordinary birth at Cedar Ridge last night, and we'd love to interview you." Lila hung up. The phone immediately rang again. Different number. "Mrs. Monroe, this is the Dallas Morning News." Hung up. Again. 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 By 3 p.m., there were 7 messages from different media outlets, 2 from lawyers. 1 from a talent agency asking if she'd considered monetizing her story. Lila turned off her phone and sat on the edge of her bed, head in her hands. This was what she'd asked for, wasn't it? For people to know, for the story to be told. But she hadn't anticipated this. The feeding frenzy, the transformation of a moment of desperate compassion into content, into controversy, into something to be packaged and sold. A knock at her apartment door made her jump. Lila walked over cautiously, looked through the peephole. Grant Carter stood in the hallway, wearing jeans and a simple shirt, looking as out of place in this building as she'd felt in his hospital suite. She opened the door. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry to show up unannounced." He looked genuinely apologetic. "But you turned off your phone and I needed to talk to you. How did you find my address?" "I asked the hospital for your employee file." He had the grace to look embarrassed, which I realize is probably a violation of privacy. "Probably. Can I come in?" Lila considered, then stepped aside. Grant entered her small studio apartment, 400 square feet, that held her entire life. A bed in one corner, a kitchenette along one wall, a small table with 2 chairs. Clean but worn, functional but bare. He didn't comment on it, just turned to face her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The media found out," he said. "I noticed." "I didn't tell them. I haven't made any statements. But nurses talk, staff talks. By this afternoon, every news outlet in Dallas had the story. Versions of it anyway." He paused. "Some of them are calling you a miracle worker. Some are calling you dangerous. The hospital is trying to decide if they should fire you or give you an award." Lila sank into one of her chairs. "And what are you calling me?" "The woman who saved my family." Grant's voice was quiet, but also someone who's about to have her life turned inside out, if we're not careful. "We?" "I meant what I said last night. I want to help you. Not just with money. I know you turned that down. But with protection, lawyers, PR people, whatever you need to navigate what's coming." "And what is coming?" Grant pulled out the other chair and sat. "Lawsuits, probably. From people who see an opportunity. Investigation from the medical board. Media scrutiny and—" He hesitated. "Questions. Thousands of questions about where you learned what you know. How you knew it. Why you were never licensed. What other knowledge exists outside the medical system." "I can't answer most of those questions." "I know. That's why you need protection." Lila studied him. This man who'd been a stranger 36 hours ago, who lived in a world so far from hers, They might as well have been on different planets. Who was now sitting in her apartment offering help she wasn't sure she wanted. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care this much?" Grant was quiet for a long moment. "Because watching you walk into that room and save my wife taught me something I'd forgotten," he said finally. "That value and credentials aren't the same thing. That knowledge and degrees aren't the same thing. That sometimes the most important person in the room is the one everyone's been ignoring." He leaned forward. "I've spent my entire life believing that success meant being seen, being respected, being at the top. But you've spent yours being deliberately invisible, and when the moment came, you had more power than anyone. It wasn't power, it was just knowledge. Knowledge is power. The question is what you do with it next." The Texas Medical Board launched their investigation 3 days after the birth. Dr. Patricia Simmons, the lead investigator, arrived at Cedar Ridge with a briefcase full of regulations and a mission to determine whether the hospital had violated patient safety protocols. The answer, technically, was yes. Allowing an unlicensed individual to perform what could be classified as a medical intervention was a clear violation of multiple statutes. The hospital could be fined. Licenses could be suspended. Careers could be ended. But Dr. Simmons was also a physician who'd been practicing for 30 years. And when she sat in a conference room reviewing the medical records, interviewing staff, watching the whole story unfold, she found herself facing a question that had no easy answer. What do you do when following the rules would have killed someone, and breaking them saved 2 lives? Dr. Brennan sat across from her, tired and defensive. "We did everything by the book," he said, "until we didn't. And the only reason we didn't is because the book was failing. The protocols exist for a reason, Dr. Brennan. I know. I wrote some of them." He leaned back in his chair. "But protocols are written based on what we know. What happens when what we don't know is killing our patients? You're suggesting we allow anyone with traditional knowledge to practice medicine? I'm suggesting we stop pretending that medicine is the only valid form of healthcare knowledge. Lila Monroe learned from her grandmother, who learned from her grandmother, who learned from her grandmother. That's over a century of knowledge passed down through women who couldn't afford medical school, who had no access to hospitals, who developed techniques out of necessity. And we've dismissed it all because it doesn't come with a degree." Dr. Simmons set down her pen. "That's a dangerous argument. More dangerous than letting a mother and baby die because we're too proud to admit someone outside our system might know something we don't." The question hung there. Meanwhile, the story had gone viral, not just in Dallas, not just in Texas. National news outlets picked it up. Janitor saves baby after 7 midwives fail. Hospital hierarchy shattered by woman with no credentials. Traditional knowledge versus medical expertise. Who won? The narrative split immediately along predictable lines. One side celebrated Lila as a hero, a symbol of undervalued workers, proof that wisdom existed outside institutions. The other side warned of the dangers of allowing unlicensed practitioners to make medical decisions, invoking fears of medical anarchy and the erosion of standards. Talk shows debated it. Twitter exploded with opinions. Medical journals published think pieces. And at the center of it all, Lila Monroe was trying to live her life. She'd taken Grant's advice and hired a lawyer, not because she wanted to fight, but because she needed protection from the fight that was coming, whether she wanted it or not. The hospital hadn't fired her, but they hadn't exactly celebrated her either. She'd been placed on administrative leave pending review, which meant she was being paid but wasn't allowed to work. which meant she'd lost her second job, which meant she was actually making less money than before she'd saved 2 lives. The irony wasn't lost on her. Then the letters started coming. Hundreds of them. From nurses who'd been dismissed for suggesting alternative approaches. From doulas whose expertise was constantly undermined by hospital staff. From midwives working in rural communities with knowledge passed down through generations, but no way to get it recognized. From mothers who'd had traumatic births because their doctors wouldn't listen. From medical students who felt torn between what they were learning in school and what they were seeing in practice. "We need you to speak," one letter said. "Not just about what you did, but about what it means. Because this isn't just about one baby. It's about a system that's failing everyone except the people at the top." Lila read that letter 3 times. Then she called Grant Carter. "I've made a decision," she told him. "What decision?" "I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to be quiet. I'm going to tell this story exactly how it happened, and I'm going to talk about why it matters. But I need your help." "Anything." "I need a platform, and I need protection from the backlash." There was a pause. Then, "I'll set it up." 6 months later, the Lila Monroe Foundation for Traditional Birth Knowledge held its inaugural conference at the Dallas Convention Center. Over 1,200 people attended. Midwives, doulas, birth workers, nurses, some doctors, a handful of curious medical students, women who'd experienced traumatic births, families who'd lost loved ones to complications that might have been preventable, and Lila Monroe, standing on a stage she'd never imagined she'd occupy, looking out at faces that ranged from hopeful to skeptical to openly hostile. She wore the same gray uniform she'd been wearing that night, a deliberate choice. "I'm not here to tell you that traditional knowledge is better than medical knowledge," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm here to tell you that both have value. That the hierarchy we've created, where one kind of knowing is valid and every other kind is dismissed, is killing people." The audience was silent. "My grandmother delivered over 300 babies in rural Mississippi. She couldn't tell you the scientific names for what she was doing. She couldn't write prescriptions or read ultrasounds. But she could read a body. She could feel things that machines can't measure. And she saved lives that would have been lost if those mothers had been 40 miles from the nearest hospital, with no one to help them." Lila looked down at her hands. The same hands that had cleaned floors. That had guided a baby out of an impossible position. That carried knowledge worth more than any credential. "I'm not asking for traditional knowledge to replace medical expertise. I'm asking for space to exist alongside it. For recognition that knowledge comes in many forms. For humility from institutions that claim to know everything, but still have patients dying from things that shouldn't kill them." A few people in the audience nodded. "What I did at Cedar Ridge wasn't a miracle. It was a technique my grandmother taught me when I was 17. It's been used for generations in communities where hospitals don't exist or won't serve them. It works. But it's never been studied, never been documented, never been taught in medical schools. Because the women who know it don't have degrees, and we've decided that means they don't have knowledge." More nods now. Someone started clapping. It spread. Lila waited for silence before continuing. "The foundation we're launching today has 3 goals. First, to document traditional birth knowledge from communities around the world before it's lost. Second, to create pathways for traditional birth workers to be certified and work alongside medical professionals. Third, to research why these techniques work so that we can integrate them into modern medical practice." She paused, letting that sink in. We're not trying to tear down the medical system. We're trying to expand it. To make room for knowledge that has always existed but has never been valued. Because when we do that, when we stop assuming that the only valid knowledge is the kind that comes from universities, everyone benefits. The applause this time was thunderous. Dr. Brennan was in the audience. So was Dr. Vance, though she'd come reluctantly. So was Grant Carter, sitting in the front row with Evelyn and their 6-month-old daughter, Lily. They'd named her after Lila. When the presentation ended and people swarmed forward to talk to Lila, Grant watched from a distance. Watched this woman who'd saved his family become something larger than herself. A symbol, a movement, a challenge to every assumption about worth and value and who got to be seen. Evelyn touched his arm. "You did good," she said softly. "I didn't do anything. She did it all. You gave her a platform. You protected her when the blowback came. You made this possible." Grant looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully in Evelyn's arms. This child who wouldn't exist if not for Lila Monroe, who would grow up in a world that was, hopefully, a little more open to different kinds of knowing than the one she'd been born into. "She was never small," he said quietly. "We just weren't looking." A year after that night at Cedar Ridge, the hospital announced a new program, Traditional Birth Worker Certification, a pathway for people with generational knowledge to become licensed practitioners working alongside doctors and nurses. The first class had 35 students, women from all over Texas, from Louisiana, from Oklahoma, from communities where birth knowledge had been passed down, mother to daughter for generations, but never recognized by any institution. Lila Monroe taught the first class. She still worked at Cedar Ridge, not as a janitor, as a consultant for difficult births. When something wasn't working, when protocols failed, when the experts were out of answers, they called her. She'd refused a full-time salary, insisted on being paid hourly, kept her apartment in Oak Cliff, because the point was never to become powerful. It was to make power irrelevant. 5 years later, the technique Lila had used, the backward rotation method for posterior shoulder dystocia, was officially documented in medical literature. The paper's lead author was Dr. Mitchell Brennan, but the acknowledgement section gave credit where it was due. This technique was developed by traditional birth workers in the rural American South and preserved through oral tradition for over a century. Our research confirms its effectiveness. We offer it not as a new discovery, but as validation of knowledge that was always there, waiting to be recognized. The paper was cited over 3,000 times in its first year, and at the bottom, in small print, was a dedication for Lila Monroe, and for every woman whose knowledge was dismissed because it came from hands that cleaned floors instead of hands that held degrees. You were never invisible. We just weren't looking. The end.